My name is Natalie Williams, and I'm 28 years old. As I drove toward the house I hadn't seen in 5 years, my fingers gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest was tight, my palms damp with unease. I wasn't returning just to visit. I was returning with a secret one that would change everything. Tucked carefully inside my bag, hidden beneath civilian clothes, was a dress uniform bearing the Silver Eagle insignia of a United States Army colonel, a rank I had earned through years of discipline, sacrifice, and relentless perseverance. A rank that no one in that house knew I held dot to them. I was still the disappointment, the daughter who took the wrong path, who chose the military over the corporate dream they had so carefully planned. But what they failed to realize was that I hadn't just succeeded, I had soared. And tomorrow, during Pinnacle Defense Systems' annual leadership conference, they'd learn the truth. Everything would shift, and the weight of their judgment would fall away like dust from a forgotten shelf. I pulled into the driveway and stared at the house I once called home. It looked the same, untouched by time. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the porch light flickered faintly, and the familiar creak of the front step greeted me as I walked toward the door. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you even a little, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because if you've ever been underestimated by your own blood, what's coming next will feel like vindication in its purest form. The second I stepped inside, the memories came flooding back, some tender, others jagged. The hallway still displayed the same old photographs, smiling faces in outdated frames. Birthday parties, graduation caps, forced holiday poses. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and nostalgia. The living room was just as I remembered. Its same weathered furniture, same floral curtains that had survived to decades of sun and wear. It felt like walking into a time capsule, one sealed tightly against any change that didn't fit the family narrative. Natalie, you made it. My mother's voice called from the kitchen. She didn't come to greet me. She never did. Her tone was polite but distant, carrying the same low-grade disapproval that had shadowed my every visit. It wasn't cruel, it was colder than that. Indifference wrapped in civility. I placed my bag by the stairs and walked slowly through the house, trailing my fingers across the banister, the mantel, the sideboard covered in crystal figurines. My father, Albert, had spent his entire adult life at Pinnacle Defense Systems, rising from engineer to senior executive. Our entire family's status had been built around his success. And from the moment my brother Gregory could walk, he was groomed to follow in those footsteps. I was never invited to walk that path. Or if I wasn't allowed to do it on my own terms. He just got promoted. By the way, my mother said as I entered the kitchen. Senior project manager now. Megan's so proud of him. Her voice brightened noticeably at the mention of his wife. They'll be here soon. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. That's great. I'll congratulate him when he arrives. The words came out flat, rehearsed. The kind of line you say when you said it too many times before. She didn't ask about my work, didn't ask where I lived, how I was, or what I'd been doing for the past half-decade. Instead, she kept talking about Gregory and Megan, their new house, their vacation, the awards he'd won at Pinnacle. In her mind, they were the family's legacy. I was the side note. I quietly excused myself and headed upstairs. The moment I opened the door to my old room, it felt like stepping into a life I no longer belonged to. The trophies still lined the shelves: high school cheerleading medals, academic ribbons, college acceptance letters, all carefully preserved. But nothing newer than the day I told them I had chosen the Army. Everything after that had been erased from the family history. Now. Photos of my officer commissioning. No military plaques. No clippings from local newspapers when I'd been promoted. As far as they were concerned, those accomplishments didn't matter. I had defied their plan. I had chosen something they didn't respect, and so they ignored it. I I sat down on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the same quilt my grandmother had made for me when I was 12. I remembered the night I told them I'd been offered a full scholarship through the Reserve Officers Development course. My father's face had gone pale with disappointment. The military is for people who don't have other options, he had said. You're smarter than that. But I knew then, and even more now, that intelligence isn't always about following someone else's blueprint. It's about carving out your own. My brother had embraced the legacy laid out for him, and he thrived in it. He took every opportunity to remind me of how proud our parents were of him, how clearly I'd failed their expectations. I stood, crossed to my suitcase, and unzipped it slowly. Inside, I carefully lifted out a garment bag, unzipping it to reveal my dress uniform, polished buttons, creased sleeves, and the glint of the colonel's silver eagle on the shoulder. My promotion had come early faster than nearly anyone else. In my division, I had risen through the ranks specializing in cyber defense systems. The very systems Pinnacle Defense had been contracted to help develop. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that I was now the official military liaison for the $1.22 billion Army contract awarded to Pinnacle. I wasn't just a part of the operation. I was leading the coordination between their company and the Department of Defense. I hung the uniform in the closet, behind a few forgotten sweaters, letting it rest in the dark for one more night. Tomorrow, I wouldn't need to say a word. The uniform would speak for itself. The doorbell rang downstairs, and I heard my mother call out. That must be Gregory and Megan. The tone of her voice shifted, brightened, lifted with excitement. That warm, full-throated pride I'd never heard directed at me. I stood, inhaled deeply, and squared my shoulders. This wasn't a battlefield, but it was still enemy territory. I had been bracing for this moment for 5 years. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered, like the walls had closed in around the expectations and the hierarchy. Gregory entered with Megan on his arm, both dressed in sleek, expensive outfits that screamed polished success. They looked around like they owned the place. Tiffany, my cousin, was already seated at the table, sipping wine and laughing at something. My father had said they were comfortable, settled, confident, but they had no idea who I was anymore. Tomorrow, they'd find out. Tiffany was now a finance director at one of the country's most respected banks. Her name often surfaced in conversations, meant to remind me of who I could have been had I chosen differently. Natalie. Do you remember Tiffany? My mother asked, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, as if Tiffany and I hadn't once shared bunk beds during sleepovers and traded friendship bracelets in middle school. She'd just closed a multi-million-dollar deal for her firm. Isn't that impressive? Hi, Tiffany, I said, offering her a genuine smile. If there was anyone from my past I still felt warmth for, it was her. Unlike the rest of my family, Tiffany had never ridiculed me for choosing a path they couldn't understand. It's really good to see you, Nat, she said, pulling me into a brief hug. Way too long. We made small talk while filling our plates from the buffet my mother had meticulously prepared. Everything was organized to perfection, each dish placed like artwork on polished ceramic. Her dinner parties were always more about presentation than nourishment. At the head of the table sat my father, Albert, half listening as he checked emails on his phone, oblivious to my mother's quiet irritation every time he broke the sanctity of mealtime with a vibration dot. Then Gregory took the floor. Of course he did. Dad, he began, his voice smug. I wanted to tell you about something exciting. Shannon chose me to lead a new project. My father's attention snapped back. That's fantastic. Shannon Murphy doesn't delegate important roles easily. She must think highly of you. Gregory smiled proudly, then shot me a glance that felt like a challenge. Funny enough, it's the same contract Natalie worked on years ago. Shannon thought a new perspective might help push things forward faster. My jaw tightened, but I remained silent. I knew the truth. The project he was gloating about It was the same defense contract I now oversaw. Every decision he made would eventually pass through me. My mother beamed at her son like a spotlight. Tell them about your team, dear. Gregory straightened in his seat. 12 direct reports. 2 of them are senior engineers with over 20 years under their belts. They weren't thrilled about answering to someone younger, but once they saw my numbers, they adjusted. That's wonderful, my mother cooed. Then, as if on cue, she turned to me, her smile turning cold at the edges. And how's your job going, Natalie? Still at the same level? Her emphasis on job instead of career wasn't accidental. Every word from her mouth was a veiled insult wrapped in motherly concern. Things are going well, I replied simply, choosing not to reveal the promotion I had just received. I wasn't about to offer them the satisfaction of dissecting it. Still a captain or whatever? My father asked without lifting his eyes from the mashed potatoes he was piling onto his plate. His disinterest in my life was almost comical. Something like that, I replied, scooping a spoonful of roasted vegetables to avoid further elaboration. You know, my mother added quickly, Tiffany just bought a beautiful new condo downtown. 3 bedrooms. Gorgeous view of the mountains. Tiffany looked uncomfortable. It was just good timing in the market. Nothing too glamorous. Still, my mother continued, it's just nice to see someone settling down, building equity, planting roots instead of hopping around. Her eyes lingered on me as she spoke, and I knew exactly what she meant. In 8 years, I lived in 4 different states and served into foreign countries. To her, that wasn't dedication, it was instability. Mercifully, my father decided to shift the subject. We've got a big day tomorrow. Shannon's visiting the branch. She's flying in personally, Gregory added, puffing his chest. She already emailed me to say she's excited about my innovation pitch. Anything special planned for her visit? I asked, feigning casual. Interest. My father nodded. Full staff assembly. Project reviews. She'll also announce something regarding our military partnership. Someone from the Pentagon's supposed to show. Maybe a colonel. Though it'll probably be someone lower ranked. I doubt they'd send anyone significant. I had to press my lips together to stop from laughing. The insignificant officer he was talking about was me. I'd be standing in that room tomorrow, briefing their CEO. That sounds important, I said lightly. Not really, Gregory snorted. The military doesn't get business. They follow procedures, stamp forms, and call it a day. Gregory, Tiffany said, frowning. That's not fair. He waved her off. Come on. It's the truth. People join the military because they can't make it in competitive industries. It's a fallback. My mother nodded solemnly, as if he'd just spoken gospel. That's what was so heartbreaking, Natalie. You were brilliant. Remember what your teachers used to say, that you had a CEO's mind. All that promise thrown away. I steadied my breathing. What exactly do you think I do in the military? My father shrugged. Push papers, follow protocols, important, sure, but not challenging. Not for someone like you. You'll never be in charge. Gregory added with a laugh. 10 years from now, you'll still be taking orders. Meanwhile, I'll have my own division. The words stung, but not because they were true. They weren't. It was the fact that even now, after everything I'd accomplished, their perception of me hadn't evolved at all. I think Natalie made a choice that works for her. Tiffany said gently, a waste. My mother replied, letting out a deep, performative sigh. You had everything going for you. Teachers, coaches, mentors, they all saw something special, and you threw it away for boots and bunkers. I stared at my plate, swirling my fork through the sauce without taking a bite. It was easier than looking up and watching them pick apart the pieces of a life. They never understood. They moved on quickly, Gregory launching into details about his upcoming vacation in Hawaii, complete with snorkeling, resort spas, and luxury dinners. Megan chimed in with her recent promotion at her law firm. Tiffany mentioned some minor shifts in her investment portfolio, downplaying them with typical grace. Meanwhile, I sat in silence, their voices a distant hum. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was silent because I was done trying to convince them of my worth. Tomorrow, when I walked into that boardroom wearing full dress uniform, they finally learned the truth. But for now, I let them talk. Let them boast. Let them believe what they wanted. Because the truth would make its entrance soon enough. Not a single word about my recent deployment. No mention of the intensive cyber warfare training I'd just completed. As dessert arrived, light and delicate atop antique porcelain plates, my father launched once again into his favorite subject, his career. Tomorrow's meeting, he said, his tone heavy with significance, could finally do it. 28 years at Pinnacle, and this contract might be what propels me into the vice presidency. I nodded with a polite smile, careful to hide what I knew. Tomorrow would indeed change everything, but not in the way he imagined. Later, I found myself back in the room I once called mine, surrounded by familiar furniture and faded posters, all frozen in time. The ceiling still bore the faint glow of the plastic stars I'd stuck there when I was 8. They looked dimmer now, but they still clung on quiet, resilient. Down the hall, my parents' voices floated past the closed door. "He's truly outstanding," my mother said, admiration dripping from every syllable. Shannon would be blind not to recognize Gregory's leadership potential. I stared at the ceiling, fingers brushing over the silver eagle insignia tucked away in my bag. Just 3 weeks old, but it already carried the weight of everything they'd refused to see in me. Sleep refused to come. I lay in the silence, remembering. There had been a time before Pinnacle consumed their dreams, before I chose the RODC when they looked at me with pride, when my future was theirs to shape, and I hadn't yet learned how conditional love could be. I saw it all clearly, the memory of sitting at the same dining table years ago, holding the RODC brochure in trembling hands, explaining how the program could pay for college and offer a career with meaning. The military, my father had repeated, his expression somewhere between disgust and disbelief. "You can't be serious, Natalie. That's for people without ambition. It's a legitimate path," I'd replied, "and it's what I want." My mother had gone quiet, then exchanged a loaded glance with him. "What about law school? You used to talk about business. You always said you wanted to be at Pinnacle someday." They had said that. I'd only nodded, trying to be the version of me they could accept. When I held firm, their support turned to silence. They stopped asking questions about my goals. My achievements in the RODC went unnoticed. When I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, they couldn't be bothered to come. Tiffany, loyal as always, made the trip alone. 6 hours each way, just to sit in a crowded auditorium and clap for me like it mattered. Back home, Gregory's promotion to junior analyst was celebrated with champagne and a framed certificate above the fireplace. My military portrait, it stayed in a drawer. Still, I moved forward. My career blossomed in spite of their disregard. I showed early promise in cybersecurity, quickly rising through the ranks. At 23, I was made captain and placed in a critical unit focused on intercepting cyber threats before they reached defense systems. At 26, I led a mission that uncovered and dismantled a sophisticated attempt to hack into military infrastructure. The breach would have compromised sensitive intelligence and endangered lives. Our success saved far more than data. The operation earned me a promotion to major and the attention of people far above my pay grade. That's when I met her captain, Eleanor Grant. She didn't just mentor me. She saw something in me I'd almost forgotten existed. Williams, she told me one night after an exhausting drill, "You're not like the rest of them, and that's going to get you places if you let it." With her encouragement, I trusted my instincts. During a standard audit, I noticed anomalies that others dismissed. She urged me to keep digging, That investigation exposed a deliberate, multi-target infiltration across classified networks. It was more than a glitch, it was a coordinated attack. I led the response team. We contained it, neutralized the breach, and rebuilt the systems stronger than before. For that, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Soon after, I found myself on the radar of the Pentagon. Eleanor, now a brigadier general, called me into her office. She looked proud, but serious. There's a contract with Pinnacle Industries, she said. They're developing high-level cyber protocols. We need someone to represent the military's interests. Someone who understands both the tech and the strategy. I didn't have to think long when she later pinned the eagle to my uniform, making me a full colonel. It felt like everything I'd endured had led to that single moment. The room was filled with military brass and government officials. Eleanor gave a short speech about leadership and integrity. And my family? They weren't even invited. They didn't know I'd reached colonel. They didn't know about the operation. That had put my name in front of the Department of Defense, or the quiet recognition I'd received from Cyber Command for preventing what could have been a national catastrophe. Years of their indifference had taught me to stop sharing my victories. After the ceremony, Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're the youngest colonel in Cyber Command's history," she said. "Don't ever downplay that." I wouldn't. Not anymore. Because tomorrow would be the first time my family would truly see what I had become. The Pinnacle contract wasn't just another government deal. It was massive $1.2 billion designated for building advanced cybersecurity infrastructure for military use. And I wasn't just a name on the paperwork. I was the liaison. I had the final word on every decision, technical, financial, operational. I controlled the project, the same one my father and brother were bragging about around the dinner table. The irony was poetic. The career they mocked, the path they called a mistake, had led me straight to a position of authority over their professional fates. They had no idea. I got up from bed, walked to the closet, and pulled out my uniform. Midnight blue, crisp and clean, trimmed in sharp brass. I laid it across the bed, watching how the light caught the polished buttons and insignia. Every pin, every ribbon had a story. Some were about missions. Others were about moments when I thought I couldn't go on, but did anyway. My hand hovered over the rows of decorations, proof of resilience, growth, grit. Things they'd never asked me about. Things they didn't believe I possessed. They had never seen the sleepless nights spent decoding threats in real time, the long deployments, the constant pressure to outthink enemies who never played by rules. They never witnessed the leadership it took to command a team under crisis, to make the kind of calls that didn't come with guarantees. But tomorrow, they'd see the uniform and the title and the power that came with both. Not because I needed their validation, but because they needed the truth. Let them keep talking about Gregory's presentation. Let my father stay convinced his career was peaking. Let my mother dismiss my choices a little longer. In a few hours, I would walk into that conference room, not as Natalie, the daughter who disappointed them, but as Colonel Williams, the woman who now held the key to everything they hoped to achieve. And maybe, for the first time, they would stop looking at me like a failure and start seeing what I had built when they weren't paying attention. I stood in front of the mirror, watching the slow, deliberate rise and fall of my breath. The uniform rested on the chair behind me, pressed to perfection, every line sharp, every detail precise. It carried the weight of your sleepless nights, hard-won victories, sacrifices I never explained to anyone. I touched the eagle insignia once more before placing it carefully over my heart, a quiet symbol of resilience, of everything they never saw. Outside, the sun had just begun to push through the morning haze. My childhood home felt still, eerily silent. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. The kind of anticipation brewing inside me wasn't one that drained its sharpened. Downstairs, faint noises, doors opening, light chatter. The clink of a cup told me my family was awake. Preparing for the day. I stayed upstairs, out of sight. There was no need to announce my presence. Not yet. I waited until their cars pulled away. My parents and Gregory, already dressed for the big meeting they'd spent the entire week hyping, had no idea what was coming. I watched from the upstairs window as they disappeared down the street. Caught in their own ambitions, not only then did I move. Each step down the staircase felt like crossing a threshold. I wasn't just leaving the house, I was stepping into the version of myself they refused to acknowledge. No more hiding. No more pretending I hadn't built something powerful on my own terms. Outside, my government-issued vehicle gleamed beneath the morning sun. I opened the door, settled in, and pulled out of the driveway with calm certainty. The 15-minute drive to Pinnacle headquarters felt like a slow ascent towards something inevitable. I had gone over every detail in my mind the night before. The contract, the tech specs, the projected milestones. I knew the project better than anyone at Pinnacle, and certainly better than the man who thought his son was its savior. Pinnacle's main campus loomed ahead, steel, glass, and pride, a fortress of polished ambition. I approached the gated entrance, where two security guards stood at attention. One stepped forward. "Good morning, ma'am. ID, please?" I handed over my credentials. His eyes scanned the information, and when they landed on my clearance level, his posture shifted. "Welcome, Colonel Williams. You're all set for entry." I nodded once and proceeded through. Inside, the air was different, cooler, controlled. Professionals in suits and crisp uniforms walked briskly across marble floors. Their conversations clipped and calculated. Eyes followed me as I passed, noting the uniform, the rank, the presence that didn't belong to their usual corporate sphere. Some nodded with polite respect. Others whispered. A few just stared. I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. I adjusted my jacket as the numbers ticked upward. And then, as the doors slid open, I saw him. Gregory stood just ahead, preoccupied with his tablet, probably rehearsing the pitch he believed would carry him into Pinnacle's elite. His posture was confident, his expression composed until he looked up. He froze. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, he looked straight through me, as if his brain couldn't quite register what he was seeing. Then recognition hit, and with it, confusion. "Natalie," he said slowly, blinking. What are you doing here?" His voice cracked just slightly, betraying his attempt to sound casual. I stopped a few feet away, met his gaze directly. "I'm here for the Aegis Project review." He stared at my uniform. "You're in the military." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been in for over a decade." He shook his head, still stunned. "But why are you here?" This project Dad's been working on this for years." "I didn't know you were. You didn't ask." I said flatly. Before he could say anything else, another figure rounded the corner. Our father. He was mid-conversation with two executives, his hands gesturing with practiced charm. When he spotted me, his steps faltered. He stopped abruptly, and the words on his tongue evaporated. His eyes scanned my uniform like it was some elaborate prank. "Natalie," he said slowly, as if testing whether the sight before him was real. "What is this?" I turned toward him. "Good morning, Dad." He didn't respond right away. His gaze shifted to the insignia on my shoulder, then back to my face. "Why are you dressed like that? This isn't some kind of statement, is it?" I kept my voice measured. "I'm here in an official capacity. You work for the military," he said, still trying to catch up. "But that doesn't explain. I'm the Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis." The silence that followed was heavy. One of the executives beside him coughed awkwardly, muttered something about needing coffee, and quickly excused himself. The other followed. Left alone, my father stared, stunned. His expression morphed from confusion to discomfort. "You're saying you're overseeing the contract?" he asked. I nodded. "That's right." His voice dropped. "You're in charge of the contract I'm presenting on today. I'm overseeing every technical and operational decision involved," I clarified. "I've been assigned to ensure full military compliance." Gregory had gone silent beside him, his eyes still, wide. I could see the thoughts spinning years of assumptions crumbling in real time. My father opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. The usual sharpness in his voice had vanished. "I didn't know," he murmured, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "You didn't." He looked like he might push back, maybe tried to reclaim control, but there was nothing left for him to grasp. The truth had already settled in. I walked past him, through the wide double doors, and stepped into the conference room. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. A long table stretched down the center, lined with folders, water bottles, and neatly ranged nameplates. At the head of the table was a small placard that read, "Colonel Natalie Williams, DOD Liaison." I took my seat. Minutes later, they entered Gregory and my father, both subdued. My father moved like someone realizing too late that the game had shifted. The strategist who'd once thought he controlled the board had just seen his king cornered. Others filtered in: legal teams, contractors, advisors, military personnel. No one questioned my presence. My uniform did all the speaking. The meeting started. I led the discussion. I posed the hard questions. I corrected assumptions. I drove the direction forward. Gregory stumbled through his presentation, the usual ease. Gone. My father tried to help, but he no longer commanded the room. The respect that once belonged to him was now mine. I laid out the military's position, flagged issues in Pinnacle's current strategy, and gave actionable instructions for Phase 2. Each word I spoke carried authority not borrowed, but earned, not inherited, but built from the ground up. By the time the meeting wrapped, the dynamic had shifted completely. My father, once the dominant voice, now sat 2 seats down, quiet, watching as everyone stood to gather their things. A few executives came over to shake my hand. They thanked me for the clarity I brought. Some asked follow-up questions. I responded with calm professionalism, answering every query eventually. It was just the 3 of us, me, my brother, and the man who once told me I had no future in uniform. He looked at me like he was seeing someone entirely new. "Colonel," he said hesitantly. I nodded, and then I turned and walked away. There was nothing else to explain. "Dad," I said, keeping my tone steady, "I'll be in the conference room. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. I noticed the cluster of executives nearby, their eyes locking onto the insignia on my chest. Recognition flickered across their faces. Most had assumed I'd be calling in remotely, not showing up in person. Barbara Jenkins from legal stepped forward, visibly surprised. "Colonel Williams," she said softly. "We weren't expecting you across the corridor." My father's brows shot up. His jaw tensed. "Colonel Natalie?" he asked, still stunned. "What is all this?" I didn't flinch. "Shannon will explain during the session," I said smoothly, then stepped past him as murmurs rose behind me. Inside the conference room, preparations were underway. Staff moved quickly, setting up presentation equipment and finalizing materials. A young assistant nearly dropped a tray when she noticed me. "Oh, Colonel, we didn't realize you were attending in person. Can I help you with anything?" I offered a reassuring smile. "Everything looks great. Thank you." I took my seat, marked but modest, ready to lead. By 8:45, the room was full. Executives filtered in, approaching me with polite greetings and firm handshakes. "We thought you'd be joining virtually," one said. "It's an honor to have you here." Their tone held something my family had never given me. Deference. My father and Gregory found their seats opposite mine. Both wore carefully neutral expressions, but I could see the tension beneath the surface. I opened my folder, focused and composed. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened again. Shannon Murphy entered with confident steps. Conversations stopped instantly. She paused when she spotted me, her expression shifting into a pleased smile. "Colonel Williams," she said. "You're here in person?" I stood to greet her. "Yes. I'm in town visiting family. Thought a face-to-face would be more productive." Her eyes sparkled with approval. "Excellent choice. Your presence adds weight to today's discussion." She turned to the room. "For those who haven't met her formally," Shannon announced, "this is Colonel Natalie Williams, our official liaison from the Pentagon. She has final oversight on system integrity, operational compliance, and technical validation." Heads turned. All eyes landed on me, not with surprise, but respect. My father's lips parted slightly. Gregory blinked, absorbing the introduction. Shannon smiled again. "Colonel, we're grateful to have you leading this effort." Presentations began. Project leads walked through timelines, progress, and pending obstacles. As each topic surfaced, attention shifted toward me, and I responded clearly, decisively. Encryption challenges? I explained the current architecture and defensive countermeasures. Risk mitigation? I outlined protocol layers and fallback timing. Questions were answered with precision. I didn't need to check notes. I didn't defer. I commanded the room. At one point, I saw my father shift uncomfortably in his chair. Across from him, Gregory rubbed his hands together. Then came his segment. He stood and began with his usual composure. As the head of user interface design, I revised that our eyes met. For a moment, that old competition returned. But this time, something else was present out. "Please continue, Mr. Williams," I said, calm but firm. He hesitated, then tried again. But the rhythm was gone. He stumbled through key points, visibly shaken. When he finished, I asked one simple question. "Have your fallback protocols been tested against multi-vector intrusion scenarios?" He blinked. "Not fully." That needs to happen. Today. Isolation needs to hold for 90 seconds under breach conditions." The room went still. He nodded without argument. The rest of the session followed with similar intensity. I corrected technical errors, redirected planning efforts, and established priorities. My tone never rose, but my authority was unquestioned. At 10:45, Shannon brought the meeting to a close. "Thank you, everyone. Colonel Williams. I'll follow up this afternoon to finalize updates for Phase 2. Looking forward to it," I replied. People trickled out, several offering personal thanks as they passed. Quiet nods, grateful expressions. My father stayed seated. He didn't speak. Gregory lingered, eyes uncertain, like he was still trying to process who I'd become. And maybe, for the first time, he wasn't seeing his little sister anymore. He was seeing a leader. No confrontation, no celebration, just silent change. I gathered my notes. On my way to the door, I paused, extension of respect. Nothing else. My reflections stood tall in their eyes. For every year of being dismissed, this meeting had rewritten the story. These matters must be resolved before we can move forward, I concluded, my tone sharp yet composed. "Please ensure the revised specifications are submitted by Friday." The room fell silent once more, the weight of my words sinking in. My father, seated several chairs away, stared as if trying to understand how this was even possible. He looked at me like I was a ghost from a life he thought he had figured out. There I was, calmly instructing his son, my brother, on technical revisions, leading the meeting he had expected to dominate. And I wasn't asking for approval. I was giving direction. This was a moment neither of them had ever envisioned. But it was one I had been preparing for my entire life. As the meeting progressed, something began to shift, not just in the room, but in the very fabric of our family dynamic. Executives, engineers, project leads, they weren't just listening to me. They were looking to me, deferring to my judgment. taking notes as I spoke. Every question that required precision was aimed at me. Every decision of consequence was mine to approve. No one interrupted. No one doubted. And in that silence between each sentence, I felt the truth become undeniable. I had earned every ounce of authority in that room. My voice didn't carry weight because of my title alone. It carried weight because I knew what I was doing. The kind of knowing that comes from hard years of fieldwork, late nights under pressure, and a relentless refusal to quit. For the first time, my father was seeing what the military had recognized long ago. I wasn't the lost daughter who turned down a safe corporate path. I was the architect behind one of the most critical national defense projects in decades. By the time Shannon Murphy brought the meeting to a close nearly 3 hours later, the entire atmosphere had changed. Colonel Williams will remain on site through tomorrow to oversee security evaluations, she announced with finality. Please grant her full access and complete cooperation. Project Aegis is essential to both national security and Pinnacle's future. The message was crystal clear. My word was not just respected. It was law within the context of this mission. As the room began to empty, Shannon made her way toward me again. Her expression held something between admiration and approval. Colonel, that was extraordinary, she said. General Grant has spoken of your leadership. But watching you today, now I understand why. Thank you, I said with a polite smile, though my attention was divided. From the corner of my eye, I spotted my father, still standing, still trying to make sense of what he'd seen. He hadn't moved far. He looked frozen, tethered by the realization that the daughter he once considered a disappointment now held more influence in this room than he ever had. Gregory stood just behind him, visibly rattled. The ease he'd carried earlier was gone, replaced by a bewildered silence. But they weren't ready to speak, and I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of dragging me back into their expectations. Shannon beckoned me toward a smaller circle of high-ranking staff still engaged in conversation. Colonel, if you'll join us, I'd like to formally introduce you to the rest of the senior team. You may have seen their names in reports, but meeting face-to-face helps solidify the partnership. Of course, I replied, stepping forward with measured ease. Shannon gently placed a hand on my shoulder, a subtle but unmistakable sign of peer recognition. Not just acknowledgement of my presence, but a silent declaration that I belonged in this room. At this level, everyone, she said, addressing the group. This is Colonel Natalie Williams, our primary Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis. She's played a key role in designing the defense protocols that underpin our infrastructure. A man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense posture stepped forward, hand extended. Colonel, he said. Thomas Bailey, Senior VP of Engineering. Your white paper on adaptive threat responses to quantum breaches was brilliant. We've already integrated several of your proposed protocols. I appreciate that, I said, shaking his hand. It's rewarding to see theoretical models being translated into real-world defenses. I could feel the tension growing behind me. My father was still there, still silent, still watching. For years, he dismissed my ambition, mocked my career path, refused to acknowledge the scope of what I was building. Now, the colleagues he'd spent decades trying to impress were shaking my hand, praising my expertise, seeking my opinion, and he couldn't find a single thing to say. Shannon continued introducing me to each executive until the final member was named. Then, with a casual smile, she turned back toward my father. And of course, you know Albert Williams, our director of regional operations. Albert's been with Pinnacle for nearly 30 years. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Everyone heard it. Everyone recognized the shared last name, and in the stillness that followed, the dots connected. Shannon blinked, looking between. U.S. Wait, Williams? Are you related? Before I could respond, my father stepped forward, the answer trembling on his lips. She's my daughter, he said, voice low and oddly reverent. For the first time, There was something in his tone that caught me off guard, not defensiveness, not arrogance, but the faintest trace of awe, as if he was trying to process how the daughter he had underestimated had become the woman standing before him now. Shannon's brows lifted. Albert, you never told me your daughter was Colonel Williams. As in, the Colonel Williams who's been spearheading our most sensitive defense project. My father hesitated, clearly flustered. I didn't know her current role. We haven't spoken much about her military career. His words were brittle, almost apologetic, and entirely unconvincing. Shannon turned to me, searching my face. I kept my expression professional, measured. I would not let personal emotions blur the edge of this moment. My family and I haven't had many opportunities to discuss my career trajectory. I replied evenly. Gregory stepped forward then, unable to hold back any longer. His voice was disbelieving. You're the one in charge of all this? The one with final say on the project? Yes, I said simply. I've overseen Project Aegis since my promotion to full colonel 6 months ago. My father repeated it as if hearing it out loud made it harder to deny. 6 months. You've been a colonel for 6 months and said nothing. Shannon looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sensing the family tension, she pivoted, trying to redirect. Well, since you're here, Colonel, perhaps you could brief the leadership team yourself. No better time to align directly. I gave a nod, welcoming the return to professionalism. Of course. Turning to face the gathered group, I spoke with quiet precision. Project Aegis is a $1.2 billion initiative focused on next-generation cybersecurity infrastructure. Its purpose extends beyond traditional defense. It's designed to evolve in real time against emerging threats, including quantum-capable adversaries. Heads nodded, eyes focused. No one spoke over me. No one interrupted. No one doubted that I belonged. I oversee full-spectrum implementation, including technical, compliance, vendor coordination, and systemic integration with Department of Defense platforms. Final sign-off on all systems flows through my office. Another pause. A shared understanding settled in the room like gravity. Shannon offered a brief smile. Thank you, Colonel. That clarity was invaluable. I acknowledged her with a courteous nod. Behind me, the silence from my father and brother stretched on, heavy, awkward, and telling. The world they knew had shifted, and there was no going back. They had spent years underestimating me. They would not get the chance to do so again. The meeting had ended, but the reckoning had just begun. As the military liaison overseeing Project Aegis, I began, stepping confidently to the front of the conference room. My role includes enforcing compliance with Pentagon protocols, verifying operational integrity, and authorizing every security measure implemented across the program. I tapped the screen beside me. A high-resolution schematic of the project illuminated the wall-layered infrastructure, encryption grids, threat response chains. It wasn't just data. It was the anatomy of a mission. As I spoke, I didn't need notes or slides to hold my hand. The system was minor-refined, examined, stress-tested under my direction. Every element had passed through my scrutiny. I pointed to the classified sector interface. All defense communication networks within Aegis are hardened under Tier 4 encryption and routed through triple isolated channels. These modifications were introduced after my strategic assessments identified latent vulnerabilities in your prior models. My voice was steady, deliberate, commanding, and slowly, the atmosphere changed. Those gathered around the polished table, engineers, project directors, executive VPs, began to lean in, their earlier polite smiles replaced with genuine attention. The updated architecture reduces breach response time by 73%. I continued. That's not theoretical. Those numbers come from live testing with black hat penetration teams under Pentagon's supervision. It wasn't just the content of what I was saying. It was the certainty with which I said it. There was no hesitation, no filler, no room for doubt, because I knew the system. I had built it to survive real threats. I had written protocols not from textbooks but from battlefield necessity. Gregory, who had been seated casually near the back, now sat stiff, lips pressed into a tight line. The smirk from earlier when he'd spoken about his new leadership role had completely vanished. This wasn't the reunion he expected. This was a reckoning. I retained full oversight of security clearances, final implementation protocols, and interagency compliance reviews. I added, any personnel shifts involving critical systems must be routed through my command. Without exception. That sentence landed exactly as intended. I saw it strike Gregory like a blow to the chest. His throat tensed as he processed it, realizing that not only was I involved in the project, I held final authority over decisions he thought he controlled. Shannon nodded, her expression confirming everything I just laid out. Colonel Williams has been instrumental in bringing this operation to its current stage, she told the room. Her authority reflects that. From this point on, any major procedural or personnel developments will go through her directly. I closed my presentation, stepping aside as the projector dimmed. A long pause followed. One by one, heads turned, my way not in judgment, but with quiet respect. Eyes lingered longer. They weren't just seeing a woman in uniform anymore. They were recognizing the architect of their most critical defense initiative. My father hadn't spoken. He sat rigid, knuckles pale against the edge of the table. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Shannon cleared her throat. Colonel Williams will be conducting executive performance evaluations over the next 48 hours. Her findings will shape our next phase. Gregory blinked in disbelief. He looked from Shannon to me and back again. It was clear he hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for a world where I evaluated his competency. When the meeting finally ended, Shannon walked with me toward the exit, her voice quiet but thoughtful. I've worked with military liaisons before, she said, but none quite like you. Your presence, your precision, it's rare. You're not just checking boxes. You're leading this. Thank you, I replied, keeping my tone formal, though I could feel the weight of my father's gaze from across the room. He was still seated, still watching, not speaking, and in his silence, there was something unfamiliar hesitation, maybe even awe. She should be proud, Shannon said, gesturing subtly toward the others. Your family, they must be bursting. Behind us, I felt him approach. His steps were slower than usual, measured. Then came his voice, softer than I'd heard it in yours. Natalie, can we speak privately? I didn't flinch. I didn't let emotion seep in. I simply nodded. I have a security briefing in 15 minutes, I said, but I can meet you in your office at 1100 hours. The use of military time was deliberate. A signal. This was business. He nodded, accepting the terms without argument. As the last of the leadership filed out, I caught murmurs in their wake. Did you catch that? She's his daughter? I heard she climbed without any family support. Didn't take shortcuts. She outranked most of the generals on her last tour. That's what Bailey said. Thomas Bailey, the one who had earlier complimented my threat response white paper, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. She didn't ride anyone's coattails, he said. Colonel Williams earned every stripe. That line echoed through the corridor like gospel, and I saw it register on my father's face. The pride he once denied me now belonged to others, spoken out loud, in front of witnesses, without hesitation. I arrived at his office at exactly 11 o'clock. Through the glass wall, I noticed something unexpected. My mother was already inside, and so was Gregory. She looked nervous, wringing her hands in her lap, while Gregory stood with arms crossed near the far wall, eyes dark with something between confusion and disbelief. Come in, my father said as I knocked once and entered. I remained standing. My uniform was immaculate, my posture formal. Every part of me communicated discipline, strength, and unshakable control. Please. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. I'll stand, I replied evenly, taking the parade rest stance hands behind my back, feet shoulder width apart. My mother looked up at me as if she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. The daughter she had long dismissed now carried herself like a general. "What's going on?" she asked, voice low. "We're just trying to understand. You saw it this morning," I said gently. "That's my role. That's who I've been becoming for years." Gregory scoffed, arms tightening. "So what do you waltz back in? Start pulling rank, and we're all just supposed to fall in line." I looked directly at him, unwavering. "I didn't waltz in. I arrived at the request of the Department of Defense to ensure this project meets critical national security standards. That includes evaluating your team." He opened his mouth, but no words came, because deep down, he knew none of this was performative. It was real. My father leaned forward, his voice quieter. "You're a colonel now." "Yes, and you're here as our superior, correct?" He shook his head slowly. "You should have told us. This is a shock." "I tried," I said. "Every milestone." I reached out. I called. I emailed. I even sent formal invitations to my promotion ceremonies. "No," my mother said, almost reflexively. "You didn't." I turned to her, gently but firmly. "I did. You just didn't respond. Or maybe you didn't take them seriously." The silence in the room deepened. "I thought it was a phase," she whispered, eyes wide. "The military. I didn't think it was this, a career, a calling." I offered. "An entire life." She blinked, tears forming but not falling. "You were always so independent." "We didn't understand. You didn't try to," I said. My father ran a hand over his jaw. "This changes everything." "No," I corrected him. "This reveals everything. The difference is, now you can't pretend not to see it." The tension in the room was thick, heavy, but the power had shifted. I had arrived not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a leader delivering accountability. They could no longer dismiss me. Not in this uniform, not with this authority, not after everything I had built without them. "Dad," I began, my voice steady but edged with years of restraint. "I've spent my entire career avoiding any association with Pinnacle. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want anyone thinking I advanced because of family connections." I stood tall, the weight of uniform and reputation behind me, yet still their daughter, still yearning for recognition they never offered. General Grant didn't assign me to Project Aegis out of convenience or nepotism. She chose me because I've led adaptive cybersecurity initiatives for high-risk military systems across 3 continents. My work has shut down foreign threats before they breached our defenses. "General Grant?" my mother echoed, surprise tightening her voice. "My mentor, my commanding officer," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "She's been everything you weren't. She's believed in me, challenged me, and celebrated every win I earned. She stood by me even when no one else did." A silence followed, heavy, aching. I saw the way Mom flinched barely, but it was there, real. "So this was all just to prove a point?" Gregory snapped, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "To show us how wrong we were? To embarrass us in front of Shannon and her team?" I didn't flinch. This was about my job, a job I've devoted everything to. I didn't ask for your permission, your applause, or your approval. I earned my place. If that shames you, that's your burden to carry, not mine. My father stood abruptly, fists clenched. "You let us believe you were still filing reports in some back office. We've talked about Gregory's deals, Tiffany's, renovations, and you sat there silent." I looked at him, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman who no longer needed it. "Would you have believed me?" I asked. "When have you ever really listened?" "Last night at dinner, I was invisible. No one asked me anything real. It was all Gregory's promotion this, Tiffany's mortgage that. You never cared to look deeper. The room pulsed with tension. The words floated between us, undeniable and sharp. "We always wanted you to succeed," my mother said quietly, a rehearsed line that sounded too polished to be sincere. "No," I replied, my tone even. "You wanted me to succeed on your terms. You measured my worth by your standards. When I chose something you didn't understand, you dismissed it. You made your disapproval clear every chance you got." Dad sank back into his chair, the fire in his eyes dimming. "Your brother followed the plan. He's doing well. I'm happy for Gregory," I said, truthfully. "He's built a path. That works for him. But I was never going to walk that same road. I needed a different one." Gregory's posture softened slightly. "We thought you were drifting, stuck, lost." I nodded slowly. "I know what you thought. You've made it clear for years. Greg, last night you told me I'd never amount to anything in the military. Your words, not mine." He looked away, jaw clenched, shame blooming across his face. "I didn't know," he murmured. "You didn't ask," I said. "None of you did. Not once. You assumed the worst and never gave me the chance to show you who I'd become." My mother stood suddenly, flustered, grasping for the right thing to say. "Well, now we know. And of course we're proud. I always told your father the military was respectable." Her words were so steeped in revisionist memory that I nearly laughed. "Please don't do that," I said gently. "Don't rewrite history to fit this moment. You weren't supportive. You didn't believe in me. You can start now, but don't pretend you always did." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She was not used to being called out. Not like this. Then Dad spoke again, this time using my name, not my title. "Natalie, what do you want from us now? An apology, a parade? What?" I took a deep breath, the years of silence and longing pushing up behind my words. "I've always wanted the same thing. Respect. For my decisions. For the road I chose. Even if you didn't understand it. Recognition that my path isn't lesser just because it didn't align with yours." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Honest. Dad stood and walked toward me slowly. For a moment, I thought he might reach for a hug. But instead, he extended his hand formal, controlled, still unable to fully surrender to sentiment, but trying. "Colonel Williams," he said, his voice thick with something new. "I owe you a sincere apology. I failed to see who you are. I judged you unfairly, dismissed your work, your sacrifices. I let my ignorance define our relationship." I looked at him not as the man who had always towered over me, but as someone, finally lowering his guard. I shook his hand, the grip steady. "Thank you, Dad." He hesitated, then added, "I don't pretend to understand everything you do. But if you're willing, I'd like to learn. I'd like to start over." The knot inside my chest tight and unyielding for years began to loosen. "I'd like that." My mother stepped forward next, less confident, searching my face. "We should have come to your commissioning. We should have asked questions, been more present." It wasn't a grand speech, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we weren't standing on opposite sides anymore. Maybe we were ready to build something new. "I wish we had been there, to see you honored," my mother said quietly. It was the closest she had ever come to admitting she might have been wrong. I gave her a small nod of acceptance, recognizing that for her, this was a significant gesture. Gregory, still standing by the large window, seemed locked in an internal debate. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. At last, he broke the silence. "So, you outrank me, by a long shot." "This isn't about status, Greg," I said calmly. "But it always kind of was, wasn't it?" He replied, his tone more introspective than bitter. "Our whole lives were framed that way, competing. Me doing what they wanted, you going your own way." He paused, then added, "And I had the unfair advantage of choosing the approved route." The honesty in his voice struck me more than the words themselves. It was the first time in years he'd acknowledged the dynamic that had shaped our relationship. I nodded slowly. We both made choices that led us down different roads. That doesn't make either one better or worse. He looked over at me, his posture softening. Still, what I saw during that meeting earlier, I couldn't do it. Not just the tech stuff. The command presence. The way people listened when you spoke. You were the one in control. It was impressive. From Gregory. That was the equivalent of a heartfelt apology, an olive branch extended without fanfare. The weight I'd carried for years began to ease, just slightly. Thank you, I said sincerely. My father, seated nearby, cleared his throat. Shannon has invited us all to dinner tonight. She's eager to get to know you better now that she realizes your family. He hesitated, then added, she's clearly very impressed. I'm aware, I replied, allowing myself a subtle smile. My father smirked, a rare softness in his expression. Of course you are. You probably understand the inner workings of this company better than I do at this point. Only the parts that aren't classified, I said. And to my surprise, he let out a genuine laugh, the first I could recall in years, that wasn't tinged with condescension. The tension that had once defined every conversation between us began to lift. Something fragile but promising replaced it, an unspoken willingness to start again. We were still a long way from healed, but for the first time, we weren't trapped in old roles. They were starting to recognize me for who I was, not who they had imagined I would be. I glanced at my watch. I need to head to another meeting shortly, but I'd be happy to join you for dinner later. As I turned toward the door, my mother called after me, her voice uncertain. Natalie, are we? She trailed off, clearly unsure how to express what she felt. I gave her a gentle smile. I know, one step at a time. With that, I stepped into the hallway, leaving them behind in the conference room to reflect on this new chapter. They were no longer talking about the girl who had wasted her potential. Now, they spoke of a woman who had earned her place at the table, and not just any table, but one surrounded by generals, CEOs, and national leaders. Their daughter, their sister, Colonel Natalie Williams. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Washington, D.C. apartment, stirring a simmering pot of stew. My family was due any moment. Hosting them still felt surreal, considering where we had been less than a year earlier. The spacious condo overlooked the Potomac and featured clean lines, glass accents, and a calming neutrality that reflected the peace I'd built for myself over time. Though a world apart from our home in Montana, this place had become mind-structured, quiet, and filled with intention. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find my father holding a framed article under one arm. I had this mounted, he said. It was in last month's issue of Defense Weekly about Project Aegis and your role in it. Thought you might want one for your wall. I accepted it, stunned for a moment. The cover image showed me in uniform flanked by General Eleanor Grant and Shannon Murphy at the project's launch. The headline read, Pentagon's Cyber Vanguard Colonel Williams leads the charge. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. Thank you, Dad. That's really thoughtful. He gave a half shrug, clearly unsure how to respond. It's been hanging in my office. Visitors always ask about it. It was hard to reconcile this version of him with the man who once rolled his eyes at my decision to join the military. Growth, I reminded myself, often comes in quiet, uncomfortable steps. Next came my mother, carrying a pie still warm from the oven. Your favorite, she said with an awkward smile. Apple, just like you liked when you were little. Thank you, Mom, I said, genuinely touched. The awkwardness lingered, but it was different now, less dismissive, more tentative. She wandered through the apartment, taking in the decor with a quiet sense of approval. It's beautiful in here, so clean and organized. Military habits die hard, I replied. And to my surprise, she laughed instead of correcting. or criticizing me. That, too, was progress. Gregory and his wife, Megan, arrived last. He carried a sleek bottle of red wine, clearly selected with care. Something fancy, he said. Figured you'd have something to pair it with. I nodded, a quiet smile playing on my lips. After a few moments of casual conversation, he settled onto the couch beside me while the others talked near the dining area. So, he said, lowering his voice, "Those security recommendations you gave me last month, I implemented them. Good to hear." I replied. "My team thought I was a genius," he said, grinning. They were blown away. I gave him a look. "And did you mention who actually came up with those protocols?" He hesitated, then chuckled. "Eventually. But I let them be impressed with me for 5 whole minutes first." I rolled my eyes, but the warmth in his tone was unmistakable. For the first time in as long as I could. Remember, my family wasn't treating me like the outsider. They weren't looking at me through the lens of their expectations. I was simply Natalie's sister, daughter, and Colonel Dodd, and for the first time, they were proud of all three. Later that evening, as twilight draped the sky in hues of deep blue and gold, I stood alone by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The atmosphere inside my condo felt different, warmer somehow, like a long-held storm had finally begun to clear. Just then, a message lit up my phone. "Scott, Dad wants us all to have dinner next week. Just family. He says it's important. Will you come?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Part of me hesitated. Was this another setup for disappointment? Or something else? After a moment, I replied, "Me. I'll be there. I'm bringing Marcus." A beat passed before another message arrived. Of course. Everyone is looking forward to meeting him. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like an obligation, but rather an invitation. One step forward. That Friday, I hosted a small gathering at my condo. The place overlooked the Potomac, clean lines and soft lighting casting everything in a quiet, elegant calm. It was mine, every inch of it earned through discipline, heartbreak, and perseverance. Albert arrived first. He was holding something under his arm, wrapped neatly. As he stepped inside, he handed it to me. "I had this framed," he said, almost awkwardly. "Thought you might want a copy for your place." I unfolded the package carefully. It was a professionally mounted news article from the Washington Post, showcasing the successful deployment of Project Aegis. My photo was centered standing tall in uniform, beside General Eleanor Grant and Shannon Murphy at the Pentagon launch. I looked up, startled. "You framed this?" He nodded. "It's hanging in my office, too, for years." He hadn't even acknowledged what I did for a living. Now, he wanted to share my story with the world. I smiled, touched in a way I hadn't expected. "Thank you, Dad. It means more than you know." Next came my mother. She held a familiar aluminum pie tin and wore a tentative expression. "Apple," she said softly, "just like when you were little." Her voice held none of the old judgment, none of the pointed remarks about my choices. She simply offered what she could, something warm, something comforting. I accepted it without hesitation. "It smells amazing." She glanced around my apartment, her eyes taking in the space. "It's beautiful, Natalie. So organized, so peaceful. Military precision." I joked, and for once, she laughed not bitterly or with sarcasm, but genuinely, like a mother seeing her daughter clearly for the first time. Gregory and Megan arrived last, arms full of bottle of aged Bordeaux and a gift bag with monogrammed glassware. "We figured you probably have everything," Gregory said, handing me the items. But these felt right. There was something unfamiliar in his demeanor, less guarded, more open. After we poured drinks and sat down, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Hey, about those firewall enhancements you suggested. Last month, I implemented them. The whole team thought I was some kind of tech genius." I smirked. Did you tell them who gave you the idea? He gave a sheepish grin. Eventually, I waited until the praise settled. Then I gave you credit. I shook my head, amused. You haven't changed that much. Maybe not, he admitted. But I'm trying. Dinner flowed easily, conversation light, laughter honest. For once, no one tried to one-up the other. No subtle comparisons. Just stories. Real and unfiltered. As the evening drew on, I brewed coffee while Eleanor Grant, who had joined us after being invited by my father, recounted tales from our time in the field. Her presence added both weight and comfort to the gathering. Colonel Williams, she began over dessert, was the one who caught the algorithm flaw in Aegis before launch. If she hadn't, the entire Eastern Defense Grid might have been compromised. Megan's jaw dropped slightly. I had no idea you were involved in something so critical. It's not just involvement, Eleanor continued. She led the entire operation. Oversight, revision, implementation. It was one of the most flawless leadership executions I've ever witnessed. The room fell silent. Then Albert raised his glass. To Colonel Natalie Williams, he said, voice thick with pride, a daughter, a leader, and a protector of this nation. We don't say it enough, but we are proud of you. So damn proud. I blinked, caught between disbelief and emotion. That toast, simple as it was, felt like a lifetime of waiting finally fulfilled. Later, as the guests filtered out and the night wore down, Gregory stayed behind to help clean up. We worked in silence for a few moments before he finally spoke. You know, I always thought I was ahead. Promotions, corner office, corporate praise. But watching you, I realized something. I glanced at him, curious. I've been playing catch-up my whole life and didn't even know it. I paused, stunned by his honesty. It was never a race. I replied softly, maybe not. But I made it one, he said. And I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. That was all I needed. As I walked Eleanor to the elevator, she pulled me aside. You changed something in them tonight. I hope you felt that. I did. Not just in them. In myself, too. Later, alone again, I curled up on my couch, a warm muggin. The article from my father propped up beside me. For the first time in years, my family didn't feel like an audience I had to impress. They felt like people who finally saw me. And as I gazed out at the city once more, I whispered the words I had long held in silence. I'm not invisible anymore.